What if I told you that the very thing you fear most is actually the gateway to your greatest transformation? Right now, as you watch this, there's something inside you that knows exactly what I'm talking about. That unnamed anxiety that whispers in the quiet moments, that invisible wall that stops you from reaching for what you truly want, that familiar tightness in your chest when opportunity knocks, but uncertainty answers the door. If this strikes something deep within you, hit that subscribe button. This channel explores the territories others are afraid to enter, the places where fear and wisdom dance together in the shadows of the human experience. Today, we're going to journey into one of humanity's most profound paradoxes, how the unknown, which terrifies us, is simultaneously our greatest teacher and liberation. We'll explore insights from Carl Jung's concept of individuation, the Buddhist understanding of impermanence, and Kierkegaard's leap of faith, weaving together a tapestry of wisdom that reveals why embracing uncertainty isn't just brave, it's essential for becoming who you truly are. Fear has been your faithful guardian, protecting you from imagined dangers and real ones alike. But what happens when that guardian becomes your jailer? What happens when the very mechanism designed to keep you safe begins to suffocate your soul? Today, we discover how to transform fear from an enemy into an ally, how to dance with uncertainty instead of hiding from it, and how to find profound meaning in life's most uncomfortable moments. Chapter 1. The ancient dance between fear and the unknown. Fear is humanity's oldest companion, carved into our DNA by millions of years of evolution. Our ancestors, who heard rustling in the bushes and assumed predator, lived to pass on their genes. Those who assumed friend often didn't. This is the inheritance we carry, this hypervigilant nervous system that treats the unknown as inherently dangerous. But here's what our ancient programming couldn't anticipate. In our modern world, the rustling bushes aren't hiding saber-toothed tigers. They're hiding opportunities, growth, love, creativity, and the fullest expression of who we could become. Yet, our brains still respond to uncertainty with the same alarm bells that once warned of mortal danger. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he wrote about the individuation process, the psychological journey toward wholeness and authentic selfhood. He recognized that growth requires us to venture into what he called the unknown aspects of ourselves, to confront what we've denied, avoided, or feared. Jung saw that our greatest treasures are often buried in the territories we're most afraid to explore. Consider the Buddha's first noble truth. Life contains suffering, and much of that suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our clinging to the known even when it no longer serves us. The Buddhist concept of groundlessness teaches us that security is actually an illusion, and that peace comes not from controlling outcomes, but from developing comfort with constant change. Think about your own life for a moment. When did your most significant growth occur? Was it during the comfortable, predictable periods, or was it during those times when everything felt uncertain, when you were forced to navigate uncharted territory? Most of us, if we're honest, will recognize that our deepest transformations happened precisely when we were most afraid, most uncertain, most out of our element. The unknown isn't empty space waiting to be filled with our fears. It's pregnant with possibility, teeming with potential versions of ourselves we haven't yet met. Every fear of the unknown is actually fear of our own expansion, our own becoming. We're not really afraid of what's out there. We're terrified of who we might become if we step into it. This is why the Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus, emphasized that we don't fear events themselves, but our judgments about those events. The unknown becomes fearsome only when we project our worst-case scenarios onto it, when we assume that uncertainty equals danger, that change equals loss, that stepping into the unfamiliar means stepping into harm. Chapter 2. The Prison of Certainty and the Masks We Wear. There's a profound irony in how we seek security. The more desperately we cling to certainty, the more anxious we become. We build elaborate prisons of routine, predictability, and control, thinking they'll keep us safe, only to discover we've trapped ourselves in lives that feel increasingly narrow and suffocating. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social expectations and avoid rejection. Over time, we can become so identified with this mask that we forget there's a whole person underneath, a vast inner landscape we've never explored because it feels too uncertain, too risky. We choose the safety of being who others expect us to be over the adventure of discovering who we actually are. This false security manifests in countless ways. We stay in relationships that no longer nourish us because the unknown of being alone feels more terrifying than the known pain of disconnection. We remain in jobs that drain our life force because the uncertainty of pursuing our true calling seems impossible to navigate. We hold on to outdated versions of ourselves long past their expiration date because growth requires us to die to who we've been and be reborn as someone we don't yet know. The existentialist philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, a spiritual condition where we're so afraid of the anxiety that comes with authentic choice that we choose not to choose at all. We let circumstances, other people, and societal expectations make our decisions for us, all to avoid the terrifying freedom of self-determination. But here's what we discover in our hiding. The very security we're seeking doesn't exist. Life is inherently uncertain. The job we think is secure can disappear overnight. The relationship we assume will last forever can end without warning. The health we take for granted can change in an instant. The illusion of control is just that, an illusion, and maintaining it requires enormous amounts of psychic energy that could be used for growth, creativity, and authentic living. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes about the groundlessness of existence, how everything we think provides solid ground beneath our feet is actually shifting sand. The question isn't whether we'll face uncertainty, it's whether we'll meet it with panic or with presence, whether we'll resist it or learn to surf its waves. When we begin to recognize that our need for certainty is actually a form of death in life, we can start to appreciate uncertainty as the very condition that makes growth, surprise, joy, and discovery possible. A completely predictable life would be a life without wonder, without the possibility of becoming more than we currently are. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Unlived Lives. Perhaps the most haunting fear we carry is not the fear of death, but the fear of a life unlived. Carl Jung believed that by midlife, many people become depressed not because of what has happened to them, but because of what hasn't happened. Because of the parts of themselves that remain unexpressed, unexplored, unknown even to themselves. Every time we choose safety over growth, comfort over challenge, the familiar over the mysterious, we create what Jung called the shadow of unlived potential. These are the dreams deferred, the talents unused, the loves unexpressed, the adventures not taken, the words not spoken. They accumulate in the unconscious like sediment in a river, eventually blocking the natural flow of our life force. The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky understood this profound human tragedy. In Notes from Underground, he explored how consciousness itself can become a curse when we use it to analyze ourselves into paralysis rather than action. His underground man is tormented not by what he's done, but by what he hasn't done, by his inability to act authentically in the face of uncertainty. This shadow of unlived lives manifests differently for each of us. For some, it's the creative project that remains forever, someday. For others, it's the relationship they never allowed themselves to fully enter because vulnerability felt too risky. Some carry the weight of dreams they never pursued because success felt as frightening as failure. Others are haunted by their inability to speak their truth because acceptance felt more important than authenticity. The tragedy is that in avoiding the temporary discomfort of uncertainty, we create the permanent ache of regret. We choose the known pain of limitation over the unknown possibility of expansion. We become experts at our own imprisonment, creating increasingly sophisticated reasons why we can't, shouldn't, won't step into the fullness of our being. But here's the redemptive truth that Dostoevsky also revealed. Recognition is the beginning of transformation. The moment we acknowledge the weight of our unlived lives, we also create the possibility of living them. The shadow only has power when it remains unconscious. When we turn toward it with compassion rather than judgment, when we greet our unlived potential with curiosity rather than criticism, it begins to transform from burden into gift. The Stoics had a practice called memento mori, remembering death, not to create morbid obsession, but to instill urgency about living fully while we can. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that this life is temporary, that every moment of hesitation is a moment that can never be reclaimed. This isn't meant to create panic, but to inspire action, to help us recognize that the risk of remaining small is far greater than the risk of growing into our full humanity. Chapter 4. The Alchemy of Anxiety and the Birth of Courage. Here's a secret about anxiety that most people never discover. It's not the opposite of courage. It's the raw material from which courage is forged. Every hero's journey begins with the refusal of the call, with that moment when the familiar world no longer fits, but the new world hasn't yet taken shape. The space between these worlds is where anxiety lives, and it's also where transformation happens. Kierkegaard called anxiety the dizziness of freedom, that vertigo we feel when we truly grasp the extent of our choices and possibilities. This dizziness isn't a problem to be solved, but a sign that we're standing at the threshold of becoming. It's the psyche's way of announcing that growth is imminent, that we're about to expand beyond our current container. The Buddhist tradition has a beautiful understanding of this process. They speak of bardo, the intermediate state between one condition and another, between death and rebirth, between the end of one way of being and the beginning of another. Bardo is uncomfortable by design because it's meant to propel us forward, to prevent us from getting stuck in transitional states that were never meant to be permanent homes. When we learn to interpret anxiety not as danger but as information, everything changes. Instead of asking, "How can I make this feeling go away?" we begin to ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me? What am I being called to do or become that I'm not yet ready to acknowledge?" Anxiety becomes a compass pointing toward our unlived life, toward the aspects of ourselves that are ready to emerge if we'll create space for them. This is why facing our fears head-on is actually an act of deep self-respect, a way of honoring the part of us that knows we're capable of more than we're currently expressing. When we approach our anxiety with curiosity rather than resistance, we discover that it often contains specific guidance about what we need to do next, what we need to learn, what we need to release. Consider how courage actually works in real life. It's not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger than fear, a deeper yes that makes the temporary discomfort of uncertainty worth enduring. Courage is born when our desire for growth outweighs our need for comfort, when our commitment to authenticity becomes stronger than our attachment to approval. The Stoic concept of preferred indifference teaches us that while we naturally prefer pleasure to pain, comfort to discomfort, certainty to uncertainty, we don't need these preferences to be met in order to live well. We can experience anxiety and still act courageously. We can feel uncertain and still move forward. We can be afraid and still choose growth. This is the alchemy that transforms lead into gold, anxiety into wisdom, fear into fuel for transformation. When we stop trying to eliminate discomfort and start learning to dance with it, we discover reservoirs of strength we never knew we possessed. Chapter 5. The Art of Befriending Uncertainty. The final paradox we must embrace is this. The goal isn't to become fearless, but to become intimate with fear, to develop such a loving relationship with uncertainty that it becomes a trusted advisor rather than a dreaded enemy. This is what the mystics of every tradition have understood, what Jung called the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites within the self. In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called don't know mind, a state of open awareness that doesn't rush to fill uncertainty with premature conclusions. This isn't ignorance, but a sophisticated form of wisdom, a recognition that the deepest truths often emerge not from knowing, but from sustained not knowing, from remaining present with questions until they ripen into insight. The Taoist tradition speaks of Wu Wei, effortless action that flows from alignment with the natural order rather than from forcing predetermined outcomes. This requires a fundamental trust in the intelligence of uncertainty, a recognition that life often knows better than our controlling minds what needs to happen next. When we begin to see uncertainty as life's way of keeping us growing, keeping us creative, keeping us awake to possibility, we can start to appreciate its gifts. Uncertainty prevents us from becoming too rigid, too identified with temporary roles and identities. It keeps our hearts tender and our minds flexible. It ensures that we never stop becoming, never reach a final destination where growth ends and staleness begins. This doesn't mean becoming reckless or abandoning all planning and preparation. It means holding our plans lightly, staying responsive to changing circumstances, maintaining what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the ability to imagine setbacks without being paralyzed by them. It means developing what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility, the capacity to not just survive uncertainty, but to grow stronger because of it. The practice becomes learning to surf the waves of change rather than being tumbled by them, to find our balance not in stillness, but in motion, not in control, but in responsiveness. We discover that the qualities we need to thrive in uncertainty, flexibility, presence, creativity, resilience, are the same qualities that make life rich and meaningful. When we befriend uncertainty, we also befriend our own becoming. We stop trying to be a finished product and embrace being a work in progress. We trade the impossible goal of perfection for the achievable joy of growth. We learn to love the questions as much as the answers, the journey as much as the destination. Chapter 6. Living as your authentic self in an uncertain world. The ultimate gift of embracing uncertainty is the permission it gives us to be authentically ourselves, not just in the moments when it's convenient or safe, but as a way of life. When we no longer need to control outcomes, we're free to express our truth. When we no longer need to guarantee results, we can pour ourselves fully into what matters to us. Jung's concept of individuation isn't about becoming someone new, but about becoming who you've always been, beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. It's about having the courage to be disliked rather than loved for pretending to be someone else. It's about choosing the uncertainty of authenticity over the false security of people-pleasing. This is where existentialist philosophy becomes deeply practical. Sartre's declaration that we are condemned to be free isn't a burden, but a liberation. Every moment presents us with the choice to either honor our authentic self or betray it for temporary comfort. The anxiety we feel isn't proof that we're doing something wrong. It's proof that we're doing something that matters. Living authentically in an uncertain world requires what Kierkegaard called a leap of faith, not necessarily in religious terms, but in our own deepest values and intuitions. It means acting from our center even when we can't see the whole staircase, trusting that each authentic step will reveal the next one. This authenticity has a quality that fake security never can. It's sustainable. When we're being true to ourselves, we don't need to maintain exhausting facades. We don't need to remember which version of ourselves we presented to which person. We don't carry the heavy burden of always being on, always performing, always trying to control how others perceive us. The Stoics understood that external circumstances are largely beyond our control, but our response to those circumstances is entirely within our power. This response is where our freedom lives, where our authenticity expresses itself, where we discover that uncertainty isn't something that happens to us, but something we dance with, something we co-create. When we live authentically, uncertainty becomes less threatening because we're no longer protecting a false self that was never real to begin with. We can afford to be vulnerable because we're not trying to maintain an image. We can afford to make mistakes because we understand that growth requires experimentation. We can afford to not know because we trust our ability to learn. This is how we transform from being victims of uncertainty to being artists of possibility. We stop asking, "What if something bad happens?" and start asking, "What if something amazing happens?" We stop trying to prevent all discomfort and start asking, "What is this discomfort trying to teach me?" We stop seeing ourselves as fragile beings who need protection and start recognizing ourselves as resilient souls capable of transforming any experience into wisdom. As we reach the end of this journey together, I want you to feel something shifting inside you, something that was tight beginning to loosen, something that was hidden beginning to emerge. The unknown isn't your enemy. It never was. It's been waiting patiently for you to recognize it as the birthplace of everything meaningful in your life, the space where all growth happens, the realm where your truest self has always been waiting for you to arrive. Every fear you've carried about uncertainty has been a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity. You thought you were afraid of the unknown, but you were actually afraid of your own power, your own potential, your own capacity to create a life more beautiful than anything you've yet dared to imagine. The unknown isn't chaos, it's infinite possibility, wearing a disguise that only love can see through. Your authentic self isn't somewhere out there waiting to be found. It's right here, right now, in this very moment, when you choose courage over comfort, truth over safety, growth over stagnation. It's in the trembling that comes not from weakness, but from the soul recognizing its own vastness. It's in the excitement that masquerades as anxiety, when something inside you knows you're about to expand beyond your current limitations. The next time uncertainty appears at your door, don't hide from it. Invite it in for tea. Ask it what gifts it's brought you. Listen to what it wants to teach you about becoming more fully yourself. Remember that every master of life has had to learn this same lesson. The unknown isn't the end of your story. It's where your real story finally begins. If this has touched something true in you, leave a comment about your own relationship with uncertainty. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their fears aren't failures, but invitations to grow. And subscribe to continue this journey with us as we explore the profound mysteries of what it means to be fully, courageously, authentically human in a world that never stops changing. The unknown is calling your name. It always has been. The only question is, are you finally ready to answer?